Welcome to Talkin' Jets. My name's Ryan, and I'll be your pilot tonight. I am joined alongside my wonderful co-pilot, filling in for Dom C. He's on a little bit of vacation. We let him go. He can do his things right now. I got 𝐃𝐨𝐦 joining the show. 𝐃𝐨𝐦, how you doing tonight?
Doing good, man. It's been a good week. It's a good day. I don't know. Things are looking up.
I like it. We got a whole bunch of stuff to get into. Boys and girls, if you're just hopping into the chat, make sure you hit that like button for us. We're going to discuss a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to go over the Haason Reddick trade, discuss our thoughts on it, and the impact that it could have, or what the what the impact of bringing him in does or potentially says about the New York Jets draft plans moving forward. Very excited about that. And if you guys have not done so already and you'd like to come watch the first round of the NFL draft with us, Talkin' Jets Draft Party, April 25th, the main event down on Long Island. Tickets on sale, talkinjets.com. 𝐃𝐨𝐦, I guess let's just hop right into it. We'll go real fast into this. You guys can let us know your thoughts in the chat. Let's talk a little Haason Reddick impact. So I want to hear from you first. Let's just discuss the trade overall. What are our feelings about it? The compensation, everything along those lines. What were your thoughts when you saw this come across the Twitterverse?
I was very excited when Haason Reddick was originally put up on the block and he was said, like, hey, if you want to go find a trade, go find a trade. I always thought the Jets should be in on that trade. But I always believed that the cost for Haason Reddick would be much, much higher than what we paid for him. Right? And so I always thought it was an unrealistic thing to expect, right? It's like when I was yelled at, because I said in the middle of the season, I said the New York Jets should call San Francisco to see if they're willing to trade Brandon Ayuk in the middle of the season. Not in the middle of the season last year, but like in the offseason, like we should call. And everyone was like, that's crazy. That's not going to happen. I thought the same way those people were looking at me about Brandon Ayuk is how I thought the Haason Reddick thing was going to happen. It's like, dude, this would be awesome if Haason Reddick was on the Jets, because Haason Reddick, in my opinion, the chat's going to yell at me for this, is what I think Jets fans think Bryce Huff actually is. Like Haason Reddick is actually that, where Huff isn't. And we got better when we made that trade. And so, again, giving up a 2026 third-round pick, dude, that's so far in the future. We have no idea if this regime, if this coaching staff, if anybody's going to be here. That could be 2 Super Bowl championships away. So I love the trade. It made our team better in a lot more ways than people are anticipating.
Dude, it's crazy. I'm kind of there with you. And I'll be honest, Haason Reddick was not on my radar whatsoever because, like you mentioned, this trade wasn't, like, it didn't make any sense. There's, one, if we're not going to retain Bryce Huff, who is a younger version of who we hope Haason Reddick will eventually be, or who we hope Bryce Huff will eventually be, is turn into, Haason Reddick. And then just the contract. Like, at face value, it was 1 year, $16 million. And I guess it seems like the Eagles are going to eat the roster bonus, so it's really 1 year, $15 million. I still would have thought the trade would have been too high. Like, some team should have offered more than a third-round pick 3 years from now. 3 drafts from now is absolutely insane, which has me thinking a little conspiratorial, tinfoil hat on the head. Do you think Joe Douglas was kind of like, hey, so remember that tampering charge you were about to get hit with for signing Bryce Huff so early in this process? Well, you can do us a solid by trading us your edge rusher for under market value. That's what it felt like to me. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. But I'm happy we got him. Because like you said, I agree. I think this is who we hoped Huff would turn into. And we basically got the now version of who we were hoping he would be.
Yeah. I don't know about all that. I'm not all of... what you're saying now that you've said it out loud makes sense. That whole kind of, was there, all of that stuff that's going on. I don't necessarily tend to believe it, but I don't think players are going for what people expect, especially like on the edge, which like it's weird because Haason Reddick should be a player that should have been sought after more, but you're starting to see players or teams more specifically get really weary of trading an asset and then having to pay for a player. That's the whole thing.
I guess when you have an Aaron Rodgers, you give up a bunch of assets for and a whole bunch of money, and then he winds up getting, snapping Achilles 4 plays in. It might make other teams a little hesitant to trade a big package of picks and dish out the big contract. Because look, overall, it's a team sport, and there's some premier positions, but it's absolutely valid to have concerns over the amount of financial commitment you want to have to any one given player at a time because of what it means if that player gets hurt. And the average career length in the NFL is 3.5 years. It's very hard. Yeah, pension comes in at 4 years. So there's statistically your roster is flipping over every 3 years. And there's that little bit of the Sauces and the Garretts and those guys that are a little more, the shelf life should be much longer. But by and large, the majority of players are out of the league within 4 years.
Yeah, you keep your roster every 3 years. What I think it's 42. The average team, 42 of the players will be different. You keep about 11 starters every 3 years. So from year 1 to year 4, about 11 of those guys on both sides of the ball are going to be on the team again, because most of those guys are either going to retire, go to another team, get traded away, get out of the league because they're just not good enough. The turnover is massive. That's why, again, you look at, it's why the draft is so important, right? It's 7 rounds. Theoretically, you should be adding 7 new players to your team every year. If those 7 players make it onto your team, that would mean 7 players need to leave. And then you got practice squad, and then you got undrafted free agents, and what happens if you trade up? What happens if you trade back and you collect a bunch of picks?
We'll talk about the money too from a draft. The 7 players the Jets draft pool this year is I think it's $10 million. And the actual financial commitment that they'll have is $4.5 million. So it is very, very advantageous to utilize your draft picks wisely.
Yeah, and you're starting to see teams, especially the better teams, they're willing to lose good players. Because the goal is, you just draft another one, or you have someone in the wings that's ready to take over. And you're starting to see that with the players, with the teams at the top that are relatively consistently there. The San Francisco 49ers. Now they're going all in and they have superstars, but they're losing players every year on the offensive line, on the defensive line. They've got their superstars. Trent Williams isn't going anywhere. Bosa's not going anywhere. McCaffrey's not going anywhere. Debo's not going anywhere. We get that. But dude, they're having turnover in the quarterback room consistently. And so you're starting to see how the draft, it's always been very important, but I feel like a lot of GMs, especially when I grew up watching, was we can just bring in a bunch of money, or at least that's how the Jets operated. We can just bring in a bunch of free agents, and that's how we're going to build a team. And I've always thought that was fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. This is the second time in the last, I would say, 25, 30 years where I would say the league is finally catching on. So when they implemented the salary cap, before that, no one cared about draft picks. It didn't matter. It was, you wanted proven players right now, and you could pay them what you wanted because there's no salary cap. And then the draft starts coming around, there's salary cap, and people are trying to figure out how to maneuver the salary cap. I'm okay, these draft picks are, kind of important. And the draft picks start becoming more valuable and more valuable. And then I believe it was 2012 when they created, or maybe it was a little bit before that, it was the Cam Newton draft, so 2010, when they implemented the rookie pay scale. And that changed the game. That was all the fun of the salary cap and trying to maneuver numbers while also getting dirt cheap players. And teams are starting to catch on. Any draft pick could be seen as more valuable than a crazy high-priced player that may not necessarily translate into wins. It may translate into some impactful plays, but if you think you could save, if Reddick's looking for $25 million a year, which is what we've heard he wants from the Eagles, or wanted from the Eagles prior to the trade, we have him for $15 million. That's a $10 million difference. Even if you just go to whatever the Bryce Huff contract was from, they're only paying him $4.5 million this year. You're talking a sizable difference in impact. That is a starting guard or whatever.
No, absolutely. But have you seen the Bryce Huff contract?
Yes,
it is the most
4.5, 7.5, 11.5, and then 27.5 in dead cap year 4.
Yep,
Wild.
It's crazy. And again, you're starting to see this. I don't want to call it desperation, but it's Howie is borderline desperate with the football team because the window is closing. We saw it this year. We saw this year that 𝐒𝐮 𝐂 was that offense. And the reason you can say that is because he went to Indianapolis and he was able to go almost make the playoffs with Gardner Minshew and a team that should not have been in that conversation, period. They didn't have the roster to compete, and they did at a really high level. Gannon left. He's in Arizona. The defense took a step back in Philly, but like also this expectation that Philly was going to stay competitive, that like the year that they went to the Super Bowl, which if you're going to put an asterisk on that, like if Birdie doesn't get hurt, they don't make it to the Super Bowl. And every team's got to get lucky. You got to get lucky to go make it somewhere. I'd rather be lucky than skilled 10 out of 10 times, right? But their corners are getting older. Their edge rushers are getting older. They signed Huff and they lost Reddick, which helps them lower the age. But Graham is like 34 years old, you know. Sweat is 28, 29. They lost both of their linebackers. They haven't really fixed the safety room. The offensive line continues to bleed players in a massive, massive way because
Lane Johnson was going to retire too. He's probably got 1 year left in him. 𝐃𝐨𝐦 retired.
𝐃𝐨𝐦 retired. Lane Johnson, we have no idea how many games you're going to get out of him. Isaac Seumalo left, remember, from the Super Bowl year to go to the Steelers. And so you're starting to see what I think is desperation from Howie. He understands that he has a limited quarterback who's not going to win a game with his arm. That's why he overpaid for players, in my estimation, like Saquon Barkley and Bryce Huff. And that's why we were able to go out. He put himself in a position to where we can take advantage of that. And maybe, like you said, you throw in a, hey, we'll drop the colluding stuff if
help us out a little bit.
If maybe we'll drop the colluding stuff if you throw us a Haason Reddick real quick. Again, it's one of those things where it's just there's a lot of things that teams get put into positions. The Jets are one of those teams where, like, if you look at our 2026 cap, we're gonna have so much dead cap hit in 2026 because we're going all in right now, and you're starting to see the same thing from the Eagles.
So realistically, the Rodgers contract, we've all kind of talked about it. It's likely this year, next year, and then probably more so than not, he's going to, hang it up. But what they'll probably ask him to do and why that 2026 cap is so alarming, I believe right now, is because they would ask Rodgers to retire post June 1st. And then that would split that dead cap over 2 years, unless we're just looking to like take the whole brunt of it in that year. You mentioned something, these teams going all in and they see the window closing. I think some of this is also looking at the salary cap and how it is exploding. Like, you're paying an average of $17 million a year for Bryce Huff across, those 4 years, 3-year contract, 4-year actual like cap hits. But the number, like that $24 million number that's looking in year 4, if you're expecting $30 million, $30 million, $30 million each of these next few years in the salary cap, that number gets dramatically lower. It's no different than inflation in the real world, where you're like, hey, my, $5 an hour I was getting paid as a busboy when I first started, way lower. Like, people getting $15 an hour right now. And it's different. Like, if you had done that further in advance, like there were some stores, I want to say it was like Costco and some of the big grocery markets were paying $15 an hour years and years before that became like kind of the standard. And that allowed them to kind of figure out their books. They were able to attract better employees to start. And I think you're starting to see that with the NFL and the mindset of, hey, this money now is not going to be what this money's worth later on. And that's the same thing with void years. It gives you that extra year of like, okay, well, it doesn't matter as much.
Yeah, you're seeing it like how you see it, the whole cap exploding and that aspect having an impact in the Quinnen Williams deal. It's 1 year old, and how much of a steal does that look like when players Christian Wilkins, is it Wilkerson, whatever his last name is, Wilkins, whatever, from Miami goes to Vegas and is making 30. That's a massive overpay. He's not in that tier of that should be the highest paid interior defensive lineman. He is really, really good. Don't get me wrong. But he's not Quinnen. He wasn't Aaron because Aaron retired, right? Like, he's not Chris Jones he's not in that tier of guys.
I don't think he's Dexter Lawrence either. Like, they're like he's further down that list. Like, he's probably top 10.
He's in that next tier. But he's not in that but he's getting paid like it, and that's because that's how
That's how it works.
contracts work. But how much of a steal does the Quinnen Williams contract look 1 year later? And now you're talking about it in 3 years from now when his cap hit is $26 million. Dude, whoever's going to come back up after an interior defensive lineman contract at that time is what they're going to be making 40 at that time, and Quinnen's going to be sitting there on 26. And so you're always playing the cap, because the cap, as long as we don't have another pandemic, the cap is always going to go up.
So Rico comes in. Oh, where's my comments? There it is. Rico says, I'll be curious to see how we use him. Will he play a traditional D end, put him in a rushing linebacker role like Bruce Irvin in Salah's Seahawks days? Going to be fun to see. So it's interesting to see how we're going to implement Haason Reddick because of his early years as a linebacker. It kind of gives you that ability to play him in a stand-up or hand in the dirt kind of role as a fifth defensive lineman, and sort of give you the vibes of, I don't know who's coming. Like, Reddick could be coming off the edge, and I got to panic about this, or he's going to do a pump fake up and then drop back into coverage, and he's going to cover these tight ends or running backs out of the backfield, and it's going to create a little bit of confusion on the defensive side of the ball, or on the offensive side of the ball, because of how versatile this guy is. How do you think the Jets are planning to implement him, and what would you like to see them do?
I like the idea that people are spouting. It's like, oh, we can drop him into coverage, and that's not really going to happen. He dropped when he was dropping into coverage, a majority of the time, it was in Arizona, and that was in his first 4 years, and he was not good dropping into coverage. And when he was targeted, he barely stopped anything. A lot of yards were being won on Haason Reddick when he was targeted, and that's to be expected. He's not really a coverage linebacker. You should not ask him really to play in coverage. Now, you can say the same thing about Quinnen Williams, and we had him drop into coverage a couple times this year. And
JFM covering tight ends.
JFM, I was about to say, right? Like, it happens because you want to send guys from different angles and you want to disguise guys. But that is not something that I would say. You're not going to see amoeba fronts. You're not going to see 5-man fronts where it's like JJ, JFM, Latu, or whatever his name is, because I can't remember the guy that we signed.
Leaky Faucet, whatever the hell.
Yeah, whatever. And then JJ with Reddick over the shoulder of either JJ or JFM with a hand in the dirt, and then you're sending him. Now you're sending 5. You're not sending him. He's dropping into coverage. You're not going to see that, in my opinion, just because you shouldn't. He should be used as a traditional defensive end and here's the benefit of Haason Reddick. Because Haason Reddick can actually play and be a force positive in the run game, you don't have to worry about your NASCAR packages. You don't have to worry about putting him in on second and medium, because you might not know if it's a run. You might not know if it's a pass. You can play Haason Reddick really on all 3 downs, and that's the benefit of going to a guy like Haason Reddick, because assuming Will McDonald does a very similar jump that we saw from Jermaine Johnson from year 1 to year 2, now you have 4 guys that you could realistically play on first, second, and third down, because they have the ability in the run game and in the pass. And especially when you look at it, this team should be playing more with the lead. So now NASCAR, like, that's my whole thing. We should be playing in our dime packages or nickel and dime a lot more, and we should be playing in our NASCAR packages a lot more. And that's what I think everybody should want, is play with a lead so that we can keep Michael Carter II out there. We can bump JFM inside because he's a pass rusher from the inside. And now we can play JJ and Haason Reddick with a rotation of Will McDonald coming in to help with that pass rush. So while I love the idea, I don't think Reddick is the guy you want to drop into coverage.
I think it's more so the illusion of that, and maybe the occasional, opportunity to do it just to keep teams guessing a little bit. Maybe you're sending pressure off the other side, and then he drops back from his potential spot. Infrared says, didn't Huff want like $17 million a year from us, or was it like 20? So my understanding is that the Jets were planning to offer him 15, and Huff wanted, obviously more playing time. He wasn't going to get it here. Went for the money at 17 with Philadelphia and the playing time as well. So from a contract perspective, Reddick at 1 year, $15 million hits that number that Joe Douglas potentially was looking for, is what I was told. Green Bean comes in and says, or we hope that, so talking about like the impact that Haason Reddick's going to have, or we hope Reddick is still the same, is Bryce Huff right now. his Philly friends, Green Bean's Philly friends, think that he's on the downturn. So I have one friend that's a very diehard Philadelphia Eagle fan, and I do like his opinion on his team, and I feel like it makes a lot of sense. And he told me, he's like, you got a dog. Like, this guy absolutely is a freak, but he wants to get paid. And like, there was some little bit of, angst maybe towards the end of the season where they thought maybe he wasn't necessarily a great locker room guy. Now, remember, they switched the defense around that final stretch of games, and Reddick didn't have any sacks during that. So that could be, the reason why the change to, who took over for play calling? It was someone wacky. Was it Belichick's kid? Is that who it was?
I don't remember.
I'm trying to think who it was.
Well enough, but the play calling did change.
It did switch, whoever it was, because now Fangio's down there. But I guess your thoughts on Reddick. He's on a 1-year, $15 million contract right now. We had heard some conflicting reports of they're possibly negotiating a contract with him. I think there's a high likelihood they want to keep him on a 1-year deal. So what are your thoughts on the contractual side of Haason Reddick?
Chat is saying that it was Matt Patricia that was calling the plays.
Matt Patricia, there it is. The other Belichick crony. Yep. My bad.
I will say this. I'll say this regarding Reddick being on the downturn. Philadelphia's defense last year was not as good as the year before. The year before, Haason Reddick had was it 18 sacks in 2022?
It was a lot. Yeah, I think it might have been 20 because if you count through the playoffs, I think it was like 20 sacks. 21 sacks.
It's 21 if you include the playoffs, but in the regular season, I believe it's 18.
I think that's right.
That defense was the number one defense in the NFL at that time. Philly was number 1, San Francisco was number 2, the Jets were number 3, if I remember it correctly. And so, but Philly's defense,
is what Rusty Spooner's saying. Sorry. 16 sacks.
Whatever it is, he had a bunch of sacks. He had a ton of production. This year, that number is still relatively high. I believe he has 10 or 11 sacks this year, and according to PFF, he has 13, but they're going off of who they attribute sacks to, not who claims the sack, because I don't know if people know this, but in the NFL, you actually have to claim your sacks at the end of the game. So there's it's a whole thing. Yeah,
really?
You have to claim your stats.
Claiming everyone. Sorry, JJ, that's my sack now.
It causes, I've heard stories about this, about how it causes friction in the locker room.
How is that possibly a thing?
Because some people will be on incentives and stuff. Dude,
that's dumb as shit. I'm sorry. I'm going to claim every touchdown as, Aaron Rodgers for last year. And he's just going to have it just because I claim
you
it.
have to be involved in it. But if it's
still stupid.
If it's 3 players on a sack, you can't give a half sack to 3 players. Only 2 players are going to get a half sack, or 1 player is going to get a sack. Again, it's a whole different thing, but that's besides the point. He's coming to a much better defense in New York. We are a much better defense. We have the best cornerback trio in the NFL. We've got arguably the best linebacker duo in the NFL, and this is the best, most stacked defensive line. Maybe not top heavy, because we don't have Bosa or Watt or Garrett, but we've got a murderer's row of players on the defensive line. So again, I think his production will go back to what the 2022 year looked like, because our defense is closer to Philadelphia's 2022 defense than it is to 2023's defense. And when it comes to signing him, extending him, or any of those things, man, I kind of just don't care. I'm not invested in whether we sign him, whether we let him go. I don't care. And the reason for that is, okay, let's say it's a 1-year rental. I'm cool with it. It's a 3rd-round pick in 2026. If he leaves and he signs an extension with another team, well, we get a compensatory 3rd-round pick in 2026 for him anyway. So we got a rental player for free. Dope. If not, and we say, okay, cool, we're going to give him that big money contract, which again, I'm probably 60-40 on, we should probably just keep him as a 1-year rental versus extending him. But if we do extend him, okay, why am I going to have a problem of keeping a 4 back-to-back years of double-digit sack production, can play the run, is a pass rushing specialist, fits kind of a body mold of what we want Will McDonald to turn into. So that's a great mentor there, all of those things. So I'm not pro or anti signing him or whatever. I don't really care, but I will say this. My belief is that if Haason Reddick gets big money with the New York Jets, that spells the end of JFM's time as a New York Jet. We have him for one more year and he gets cut next year because I just don't know how you're going to. You can't have that much money invested into an edge position where you have 2 first-round picks vying for playtime.
So I agree. I do think I would say I'm more on the, I would say like 80%. I want him to play 1 year on this contract. And then I would follow that up with, I'm going to franchise tag him or transition tag him after the year because it's still going to be way cheaper than extending him. And this is a 2-year window. So by doing that, you're kind of at the mercy throughout this year of needing to, like, if your plan is, hey, we're going to franchise tag Reddick, you got to figure out what you want to do with DJ Reed. Do you want to allow him to walk, or do you want to allow him to, maybe restructure his contract, bring him back on a longer term deal? And Michael Carter II. Those are really the 2 guys that stand out to me on next year's roster that you're really going to have to kind of figure out. Like other players that are kind of in that, not in that mold, but other players that are going to be up for contracts. Brandon Eccles, Tony Adams, Solomon Thomas. We're going to exercise AVT's 5th-year option, so I'm not concerned about that.
Probably.
Chuck Clark, Morgan Moses. Like, the only ones you're thinking about franchising, realistically, is going to be Reddick. You're not going to franchise Michael Carter II as a slot corner, and you're not going to franchise DJ Reed, I don't think, as a, your corner opposite Sauce. I would be kind of surprised if that were the case. So I like the idea of not extending Reddick and making him, like, back against the wall. You got to perform now. That's the type of like hunger I want to see out of him and out of that position.
Yeah, like I said, I'm totally cool with renting him for a year. We see that in hockey all the time, at the deadline. And this is one of the reasons I wish they would have pushed the deadline to week 12, because that 66% of the season is done at that point.
I'm right there with you.
I would have loved to see that, because I would love if the deadline mattered more. It doesn't matter. Week 9, dude, teams still have hope. Week 9,
week 12, your hope is dead. Every other major league has it at like 66 or 65 to 75% of their season being completed. I don't know why the NFL is like, week 8, that's like 40% of the way. That's fine. No, it should be, like you said, much further. It should be around Thanksgiving. Like, make it around then when teams, maybe have a little bit of hope or understand, like, okay, our season's probably lost. Let's get some of these good players onto teams that are actually going to matter come playoff time. Like, it would suck to see whatever team is, I don't know, throw in major player goes down for the Jets, whoever it is, doesn't matter. But it goes down, you're around Thanksgiving, you can go out and say, hey, this team over here, the 49ers, whatever, you guys are floundering, you're going to blow it all up. We want Christian McCaffrey for half a year.
Yeah.
Get your good players on the field.
Because then you get situations like what the we all knew that the San Francisco 49ers were going to be competitive, right? And what did they do? They treated the trade deadline like we see in other sports. They loaded up. They went and they got Chase Young, and they brought in the players that they needed to try and compete. And so I am totally on board. I think Thanksgiving is a little too late in the year, personally.
That's got to be near week 12.
I think Thanksgiving is closer to week 14. I think that's a little too late, because if you go, the season is
the trade deadline is usually the week
ends in
before
January, right?
November. Week 9 is like the first week of November. So 3 more weeks would be 12.
Whatever, 12 weeks. I thought Thanksgiving was farther in the year, because that would be.
It's the 4th Thursday in November.
Wouldn't that would leave the rest of the season with what, 6 weeks left?
So
that would be week
5
No,
weeks.
you're right. Yeah, that's week 13. Yeah. That's week 13. Whatever. That's besides the point. I totally agree. I think they should move it back, because the trade deadline matters in other sports. The trade deadline for hockey, I am on my phone the entire day, nonstop. I never stop. And so, because at any moment you can see a team go, screw it, 1st round pick for a guy on a 1-year deal, but this guy's a superstar, we're going all in. And we knew that this guy was going to leave, or we knew. And then you get like these really cool moments in hockey where it's just like, look, we're not competitive this year, and we know you're not going to re-sign with this team. We're going to trade you so that you can chase a ring in the offseason. Come back. we're bringing you back. We don't want you to go, but we need this pick, and we want you to be able to compete. Go, we'll bring you back. Here's the money that you deserve. Those kinds of things. So, yeah, I think the trade deadline should be a much, much cooler or impactful part of the season.
Sean comes in and says, why are there so many safeties available and we haven't grabbed one? Are we waiting to say, hey, you have nowhere else to go. Here's a 1-year deal to let you prove it. I think some of that is true to an extent. Like I think before the draft, there's going to be a pressure on some of these players. Like, hey, I got to sign before these guys start drafting replacements when there's less spots for me to go to. So I think there's a little bit of a crunch just before the draft where we'll see if you guys sign. Then I think there's going to be a little bit of a lull after the draft. And then you'll see guys that are like, okay, well, you know what, we're past that June 1st mark. We have a little bit more cap space due to XYZ players getting moved. Now let's try to bring in some of these safeties. That's my interpretation of it. But why do you think there might be so many good safeties sitting out there right now and teams don't seem to be going after them?
Money. We've realized that the safety position, unless you're playing a scheme that is really capitalizing and making the safety the focal point of your coverage, a la the Pittsburgh Steelers, Micah Hyde is their entire, not Micah Hyde, this is Micah Hyde. Minkah Fitzpatrick is their entire secondary. It's Minkah Fitzpatrick and friends when it comes to that secondary. That's it. Because Minkah is doing everything on his own because he's so talented that he can. But this day and age of, to use another Steelers quarterback, of, you know, your Palomalus existing and your like superstar safeties is just not a real thing. And again, it seems like the Jets are all in on the 3 safeties that we have on the roster right now. We know that they're not moving off from Tony Adams. We know that they brought back Chuck Clark, so they seem to like Chuck Clark. I was a big fan of that move. And they're fans of Jarek Bernard-Converse, the cornerback, but who's really listed, he's a safety for the New York Jets. And so when you take into consideration that 3 of the guys in our safety room right now are guys who were taken in the 6th round or later. Tony Adams was a undrafted free agent. Chuck Clark was a 6th round pick, and Jarek Bernard-Converse is a 6th round pick. There is more of a belief, at least in our building, hey, if you need a safety, cool, we'll just get one in the 6th round and we'll make them work. I think they're still trying to sign Ashton Davis, and so they're still going after that. So it's just, there's a lot of guys still available, because I think kind of like the running back position on the offensive side of the ball being undervalued, we're seeing the same thing happen to safety. Safety isn't being valued at where it probably should be, and safeties aren't making a ton of money. And on top of that as well, because there's so many guys available still that you can get that could just immediately come in and start, you're not that worried about it because they're not falling off the board. Remember the Garrett Wilson draft year? We take Garrett, it went Drake London, Garrett Wilson, and then everybody came up for a wide receiver.
Olave, Jameson Williams, it was a gauntlet of like 3 or 4 guys in a row.
Everybody came up because they were like, oh crap, the wide receivers are going, and they got overdrafted, right? Because it went, oh crap, Olave, and then Treylon Burks, and then
Jameson Williams
kid from Detroit, Jameson Williams, JMO, and everybody's coming up. It's that same kind of concept, which is just like, once one goes, they're all gonna go. But we might have to wait because, one, their value goes up post the draft.
For sure.
If the draft comes and a team needs a safety and they don't have a safety, Marcus May looks a little bit more enticing as an option. And you maybe want to get to his number more. Maybe you're more comfortable saying like, crap, we didn't want to give him 5, but we'll give him 5.
Yeah, I feel like your plan is a little bit more in place. Like no one, I mean, I guess at this point, you probably did not want Cook at $8 million, but you definitely didn't want Cook at $8 million before the draft. And then when you figured out, oh, hey, Aaron took less money, we've got kind of fun money to spend on players he would like us to get, then you feel a little bit more like, okay, let's get Aaron's guy. Now, as far as the Reddick trade was considered, in terms of the draft, like how does this impact the draft? What are we hearing from rumors around the NFL? What are your thoughts, I guess, on how these picks kind of shake out? Because I think everyone's been penciling in quarterbacks 1 through 3 for the longest time. And I know in our group chat, we've talked a little bit about where we think that 4th quarterback is going to go. And because of the Chargers sitting at 5, seemingly willing to trade out, I feel like they are begging the Vikings to give them the 2 firsts to slide back. That's like the ideal trade for them. It all hinges on what the Cardinals want to do at 4. Because if the Cardinals are dead set on picking a receiver at 4, or any other player, whatever it is, at 4, then they're going to sit and make the pick. But I would have to believe that the Vikings are trying to get up to number 4 because the Broncos and Raiders can't trade with the Chargers at 5 if they want a quarterback. So they have to come up to 4, meaning the Vikings now have to come up to 4. So what are your thoughts, I guess, on the quarterback situation overall and how the draft might break in front of us?
I have always been a believer that 4 is for sale. If you, especially after the Minnesota Vikings trade, if you're the Cardinals, this is the year you would want 3 first-round picks. Yeah, you drop from 4, but you go from 4 to what? 12 is where I think the Vikings are?
11.
14? 11. So you go from 4 to 11, and okay, yeah, you miss out on Marvin Harrison Jr., and that dude is exceptional, right? But
you
you're
get the
now
second
also
best
going,
edge potentially.
Now you're, like I was about to say, now you're going to be able to get Jared Verse, right? Or Dallas Turner. I have Jared Verse as edge 1, but I think that's just my love for Florida boys because
Florida.
Dude, Dallas Turner is a stud. They're so close. Dude, I flip-flop every day, right? But you could legitimately go and say, oh, we're the Arizona Cardinals and our defense is in shambles, but we also need a wide receiver. Cool. What I can do is I can get Jared Verse, the first cornerback off the board. If not, like I can get the second or third cornerback off the board and still get Brian Thomas Jr. And now I've got a new wide receiver for my quarterback. I've got a cornerback for my defensive head coach and an edge rusher. Like, that's too appealing in my eyes to not move out of 4. You get
plus probably a 2025
picks.
first. It's probably 3 firsts realistically is what they're going to get.
I don't know if that 3rd first comes in.
I think they definitely do because Denver doesn't have a 2nd round pick, so Denver's going to have to overpay to get there.
But I think it's 2 firsts in this year's class, and the reason I say that is because it's the 4th quarterback. The Vikings would be getting whatever's left. Not their pick. That 3rd first-round pick would come in if they were going to 3, if you're convincing a team to move off of a quarterback, or if you're coming to 2, in my opinion. So I think it would be the 2 first-round picks. Plus, you'll get like a 2nd or a 3rd in 2025 or whatever. I'm not saying, but I think that's the way that goes. And the impactful part for the Haason Reddick, for the Jets specifically, is, 1, it should move us off of any possible idea of taking an edge in round 1, right? That should not be on the boards at all. Because if you're going to look me in the face, Ryan, I want you to look me square in my face and say that you think this coaching staff wouldn't take an edge in round 1 when we don't need one?
I hit the wrong button.
You guy's an idiot.
That's the right button.
We saw it last year.
You're an idiot.
We took one in round 1.
No, we're not taking an edge.
You're not fall in love with Dallas Turner. I don't want it to happen, Ryan.
I swear on your life, I'm going to eject you from the cockpit. Boom. Getting a sneak peek into what I'm doing later.
I don't want it to happen, but now this 100% should make it where we don't do this. This is good news.
So let's bring it back into reality.
Side of the ball.
If we had spent anything other than an offensive pick on the number 10 overall pick, I would have lost my goddamn mind. I nearly lost my mind when we drafted Will McDonald last year. But I think what the Reddick trade says is 3, like the 3rd round pick, the 72, is basically guaranteed not to be an edge rusher at this point. I think that makes me feel a little bit better because I think that's where some of us might have been starting to think like, well, if we don't get someone and Huff's gone and we just lost out on Clowney, there's a real good shot maybe that pick, due to the important nature of it, could wind up being it. But I think for me, what it says is the Jets are dead serious on players that are going to play right now. And to me, that's telegraphing it's going to be a weapon. It's going to be a weapon at 10. I'm totally down for offensive line. I don't want to make this be like the Ryans on Brock Bowers or the Ryans on Odunze. I mean, I do have Odunze and then Bowers as my 2 that I would prefer. But the way I'm looking at how the Jets are operating, it doesn't tell me that they're planning to go offensive linemen. I do think they're going to try and trade down. I think that's probably the best thing they could actually do. Try to pick up an extra 3rd, try to pick up a 2nd, something along those lines. But if they sit and pick at 10, I would be surprised, I think, if they wind up going with an offensive lineman.
I got interrupted because I said this should move them off of an edge rusher, but I was going to say the same thing. I think going for Haason Reddick doubles down the all-in mentality that we didn't have last year. That was the message I was trying to walk for a short drink of water. No. But you said it perfectly. And the whole idea is there was this belief, and don't act like you weren't in this. I'm in the group chat, Ryan.
Oh, dude, I wanted no part of Bowers when you, well, this was probably pre me looking into Bowers. This was probably before the end of the season, before I'd started my draft stuff. Because you and I were talking, you're like, you got to get on Bowers. You've been telling me this for a while. And I was like, dude, it's tight end in the top 10. And as I started watching more and more, I was like, this is going to be the pick. Like, it's 100% going to be the pick. I felt this way prior to the Reddick move, and now I feel even more confident it's definitely going to be it.
And I'm not saying Bowers at 10. I don't actually necessarily want Bowers at 10. I would love a trade back, and then you get Bowers. We've had this conversation. But, what I meant is there was a growing fear that, like, at least in some of the people that I was talking about, is just like, it seems like the Jets are going all in. And for us to think that this coaching staff and that this front office would not take a lineman either side of the ball if they're the best player on the board, because you're not going to tell me that at 10, if Dallas Turner and Jared Verse are both on there, they're not the best player on your board. I'm not gonna believe you. You're just objectively wrong. But by going and getting Haason Reddick, it should hopefully move us off of that defensive player in the first. But secondly, it shows and proves to me that they're all in. They're going for it. They're loading up. And while we did just get a report from 𝐃𝐨𝐦 saying that the New York Jets are shopping 10, and I don't know how much you're going to trust 𝐃𝐶MNY, but he has been a reporter for a long time, so I'm going to take that at least with a grain of salt. I look at it more as the Jets are loading up. The Jets are saying, we're going to answer as many holes on the roster as possible. We're going to address as much as we can in free agency, which has always been my plan, that I said, you have to go into 10 being an amoeba, so that if a team wants to come up, they have to convince you, because you can take the player that they want. If you're sitting there and it's Brock Bowers, Rome Odunze, and Olu Fashanu, right? Or Jared Verse or Byron Murphy, you could theoretically go to whatever team it is. It's like, oh, you want Rome Odunze? We were going to take a wide receiver. Convince us not to take him. Go. Oh, you wanted to get Olu Fashanu? Well, Tyron Smith is only on a 1-year deal. That's who we were going to take. Convince us not to take him to get more. But if I'm the Jets, I'm calling Tennessee and Atlanta.
Moving up.
I'm setting feelers there. Hey, Tennessee, what would it take for you to go to 10? Just what does that take? Because if it goes quarterback 1, 2, 3, 4, offensive lineman or Brock Bowers, or even wide receiver 5, and then wide receiver 6, Tennessee's probably going to take an offensive lineman. Now you're looking at, hey, 7 and 8. If you're staring down the barrels of Malik Neighbors and it's only going to cost you 72, I would do that in a heartbeat. I would do that in a heartbeat. So
that would be a wild move. I do think that there's a few things that you could do. You could say, hey, the Jets are all in. They're going to go up and get a guy, whether that is a Malik Neighbors or it is a Marvin Harrison Jr. You could look at the other way too. And part of the way I think I started to feel a little bit more towards weapon when I heard they don't expect Mike Williams to be ready. And that to me is a little bit more of like a flashing red light. But you could argue if you trade down, I think the Jets do ideally want to bulletproof this offensive line. Like, we will draft offensive linemen in this draft. It's going to happen. And to me, if you can trade down, to pick, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, somewhere in that realm of players, like maybe Seattle wants to come up and get Michael Penix Jr. or something along those lines. Like, that's the type of move I would love to make. Slide down a few picks. And then if Bowers is there, great, make the selection. If not, go with Fautanu. Go with an offensive lineman that gives you the ability to have some insurance for AVT and for Tyron Smith, because God forbid something happens to Bryce, you need AVT to stand, or you need Aaron Rodgers to be able to stand upright and throw the ball down the field. And you don't quite have the magic if Bryce is gone. If you wind up losing a receiver, it would greatly suck. Be terrible. But Allen Lazard was the best receiver on Green Bay when Aaron Rodgers was there just before. So like I can rationalize some of this stuff in my head, and free agents become available, at the trade deadline or whatever. Like guys move. And I feel like you could do that. Offensive line is a lot tougher. So I totally get if they want to go that way, but I'm with you. I think there's definitely an all-in nature with this signing that leads me to believe, especially after last year, they wanted a Jahmyr Gibbs. They wanted to go draft Michael Mayer. And to me, that's saying, okay, the same tight end room minus 𝐃𝐨𝐦 𝐂. And with the whole Gibbs thing, they're looking for a home run threat, and they're looking to upgrade the tight end room. Bowers is just the guy that hits all those kind of sort of facets. And look, you can even line him up in the backfield if you want. Like there is some degree of like RB2 nature to him in some aspect. So I don't know. If I was a betting man, I'd throw $1 or $2 on the Brock Bowers train at 10.
I totally agree. And I love the idea of Brock Bowers as the weapon that he is. And again, my number one, I have not moved off of this, is you trade out of 10 and you go get Brian Thomas Jr. That is still my perfect case scenario. If that happens draft night, I'm popping champagne. I'm streaking down my neighborhood naked. I'll be in Long Island before the end of the draft. I'm going to be so hyped. I'm going to run from Florida to Long Island, just butt ass naked. We did it.
It's great.
I called it. I'm right.
Like I knew what was going on. Dude, let's talk about Brian Thomas Jr. real quick. Dude runs a 4.3 40 at 6'3", and like Neighbors is getting all the news from his pro day running the 4.3 whatever. Like it's fascinating watching like how these receivers could break out. It wouldn't shock me if Brian Thomas Jr. went ahead of some other players that we didn't expect in this draft.
He is, in my eyes, clearly wide receiver 4 in this class. I think it's very, very
That's
clear.
where I would put him too.
But there is also clearly a gap from Thomas to Odunze, and then there's a gap from Odunze to Neighbors and Harrison. Like the tiers go Harrison Jr., generational. Right on the cusp of being generational. I might have called him generational if Marvin Harrison Jr. didn't exist. Malik Neighbors. Yep. That's tier 1. Those are the guys. And then Rome Odunze is right there on that. Oh my God, he's so good. And then you get a pretty, not so significant that I wouldn't take him at 10, but also not so insignificant that it doesn't matter. It goes Odunze to Thomas. But Thomas is what?
It falls off after Thomas.
6'3", 100. I wouldn't say.
I would say it starts. Maybe you have to pick and choose, right? Like it's A.D. Mitchell,
Roman Wilson,
it's Worthy, it's Troy Franklin.
Worthy. Yep, Troy Franklin. There's a bunch of guys. But again, they're in that next tier below Thomas, in my opinion. But Thomas is one hell of a player, especially when the conversation going into the year for LSU, and for a lot of people who don't, like, I summer scout. I love the draft. I'm already looking into next year's draft class because I've done all of my tape for this year's draft class. So I'm looking into next year's draft class and starting to figure out what the storylines are. And during summer scouting, the conversation about Brian Thomas Jr. is, and happened up until the season started was, is he going to step up and be the wide receiver that LSU needs? If LSU wants to be competitive, it cannot be the Malik Neighbors show. It needs to be Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. Who's going to step up for LSU? And he did in a big way, and in such a big way that he led the NCAA in touchdowns amongst all receivers, more than his teammate Malik Neighbors, more than Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze. Out of everyone, he led the nation in touchdowns. As 6'3", runs at crazy. It runs crazy fast. And again, the other aspects of his game are all things that can be polished. Is he the best route runner? Nah. But that's something that can be polished. And we saw Azani do that last year. He had 3 undrafted free agents who at the beginning of the year I had zero faith in because of the on-the-field product, the tape. And they got better as the year went on. And so I love Brian Thomas Jr. If you're telling me you can go from 10 to 14, let's say, because the New Orleans Saints want to come up for Olu Fashanu or whatever they want to do, and then you can get Brian Thomas Jr. and get another top 100 pick, I would totally be on board. Whether that's a third, whether that's a second, I love that. But again, there's a lot of players in this class where it's just like, there's so many good players in this draft.
So Daniel comes in. He says, "You guys better draft a left tackle because you bet your bottom dollar that Smith won't be playing 17 games." So Daniel, I agree. I don't think Tyron Smith is going to be playing all 17 games, but I would challenge you to tell me, has he missed any critical games? Because since 2015, which was his last fully healthy season, the Cowboys have played in 7 playoff games, and Tyron Smith hasn't missed one of them. So Tyron Smith is not missing with season-ending injuries towards the end of the season. We are looking at, him playing 14 games over the course of 17 games and having spot starts missed. And in that kind of capacity, I am okay with a Carter Warren for a game. And then you get Tyron Smith back. Or it's like, hey, it's going to be 2 weeks. He's got a sprained ankle. I'm good with that. I'm okay with that. It's the oh no, this guy has lingering knee issues. Like if you had told me Bakhtiari is our starting left tackle, there's a lot more, concern to have that backup there. And I feel like it's definitely different with Tyron Smith because of the way he has been injured.
Yeah. I totally agree. The way that I look at it is Morgan Moses is probably not going to miss any type of time, right? The guy played with a separated freaking shoulder, pec, whatever it was, injury all year and still graded out as one of the best right tackles in all of the NFL, which is just insane. And then I totally agree with you. If you're telling me you can get 13, 14 games from Tyron Smith,
and he's going to be available in the playoffs.
And he's going to be available in the playoffs. Give me 5 games of Carter Warren. I have no problem with that at all at left tackle. And people are still kind of sleeping on this idea, and I still think it might happen. I don't know, but there's still people out there that the New York Jets could bring in post-draft if that's really a thing. Now, the names aren't great, but there are options. You can still go out and bring in David Bakhtiari. If he doesn't find a job and no one's offering him anything and he's not finding a starting job anywhere, well, come be a backup for Tyron Smith. You're probably not going to play all 10 games, and then you have a conversation with Bakhtiari because he's younger, and if he can stay healthy all year and he can fill in and play at a high level, you can start having a conversation about extension there. Andre Dillard, if that's what you want to do. And I don't, but that is a conversation there. Riley Reif, Mekhi Becton, they're still out there. They're still available. Chuma Edoga, if you want to go back to the
Mekhi Becton would be a sneaky, if you can come back and say, hey, we're bringing McGovern and Becton back post-draft, there's no way the Jets go offensive line at 10. That's my thinking is they have something in the back pocket. I've been saying it's McGovern and Bakhtiari, but Becton is a really interesting one. And it's not one that I would have endorsed as a starter and not one that I would have endorsed for any kind of decent money. I think bringing him back post-draft as hey, you're going to be a swing tackle. You're going to have an opportunity. We have Morgan Moses, 1-year contract. Tyron Smith, 1-year contract. Go out and prove it. That's something I could kind of, sort of get on board with. Blitzkrieg comes in and says, which player, if slid to number 10, or if he slides number 10, would you stay and take? I should say 3. Alt, Neighbors, Marvin Harrison. I'll take Marvin Harrison Jr. out of it because I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think Neighbors is going to be there either. But I would say Alt, Neighbors, Odunze.
The only players I am 100% sticking and picking, and you will not move me off this pick, Joe Alt, Malik Neighbors. I'm not even going to entertain Marvin Harrison Jr. He should be the first non-quarterback taken in the draft. If he's not, whatever team that is, sell them. Move them to the Canadian Football League. No, they don't even deserve to be in the Canadian Football League. Move them to Mexico. They're going to be part of the Mexican Football League. That is a mismanagement of assets. All of the teams in the top 10 could use Marvin Harrison Jr. So if he's not the first non-quarterback taken, it is a mismanagement of assets. But Malik Neighbors, Joe Alt, they're at 10. I'm taking them.
Yeah.
And it goes in order, Malik Neighbors over Joe Alt. Personally.
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree. I think, and it's more so because we've solidified our offensive line, and it's the all-in nature of that. I really like Malik Neighbors. I really like Joe Alt. Either one of them I'd be tickled pink with. I don't think either one gets to us. If I'm going down this mock draft in my head, quarterback 1 through 4. Number 5 gets interesting because now you start having a conversation of how realistic is it that Michael Penix or Bo Nix could potentially come off the board. The Giants with the 6th pick and Daboll not having ever drafted his quarterback, how much leash is he going to get? One more year of Daniel Jones, they're going to say, hey, you can draft a quarterback in a bad quarterback draft next year? Maybe. But like, they seem to me like someone that could, if they're there at the back end of the first, could trade back up. But with Denver not having a second round pick, I feel like Denver's definitely taking a quarterback. It's just a matter of how they're going up there to get it. And I think Denver would have to go up to 4 and wildly overpay. And I feel like the Vikings might be able to give up the 2 firsts to the Chargers, and they'd be fine with that. But again, it depends on who those quarterbacks are ultimately going to be. So let's say 4 quarterbacks go off the board. I do think Marvin Harrison Jr. to the Chargers makes a ton of sense with their loss of wide receivers. I think Neighbors to the Giants, once J.J. McCarthy and the other 4 quarterbacks are off the board, makes a lot of sense. Alt, Turner, I still don't know what the Bears do. And it makes things very interesting. There's a lot more players for the Jets at number 10 that like I did not think were going to be there.
I also think that there is a surprise trade for a quarterback. I'll say it.
I think it's going to be Denver.
No. I don't know if week 1, what's his name? Short guy in Arizona. Kyler Murray.
Kyler?
I don't know if week 1 Kyler Murray is the quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals. That would be my hot take. This is my 8 years in.
Kyler to the Vikings?
No, they wouldn't trade into interconference. If he's going to go anywhere, it would be to Denver, probably. But again, you have this conversation. Like, I don't have first round grades on Michael Penix or Bo Nix and players like that. But 7 teams still need a quarterback, right? 7.
Yeah.
Did the Raiders
Vikings
fix
Raiders
quarterback?
They got Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. They want to come up for Jaden Daniels. It's not happening though. They're not going to get that high.
So again, you've got this 7 teams need a quarterback. And at least the Vikings have a backup plan, so they're maybe not that desperate for a quarterback because they have Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell. But like 7 teams need a quarterback, there's 5 quarterbacks. That's it. So, and I've also heard rumblings. I have a buddy who does a Giants channel, like a pretty significant one, who was just like, from what he's hearing, the Giants are all in on J.J. McCarthy. They
could trade up to 3, I think.
They're talking. They're trying to get to 3 to go get J.J. McCarthy.
That Daboll and Patriots connection is strong.
They're trying to get to 3 to go get him. And then there's also a very serious conversation that I heard that Washington has said that 2's for sale. That Washington likes. They're not dropping out of the top 8, but that Washington likes 5 of the 6 quarterbacks that could theoretically go in the first enough to say, if you want to give us 3 first-round picks, we'll move off of 2. Like, they're willing to pass up Drake May and or Jaden Daniels.
Jaden Daniels and Michael Penix are the 2 quarterbacks I really like in this draft. Like, if Penix didn't have the injuries, he's my top quarterback, I think.
He'd be quarterback 2 for me if he didn't have the twice surgically repaired knee. Like, I love Michael Penix, but if you're a team that can look past that, like, if you're a team that can look past the whole injury thing, he should have a first round grade. I just can't. I have such a hard time looking past that. So it's the thing with Latu.
Seattle, come up for your guy.
So much. Yeah. There's so much play that can happen in the top of the draft. It's going to just shake things up. We have no idea what's going to happen. So,
boys and girls, we have reached the end of our time. We're going to be heading over to the call-in show on my channel. I'll direct you guys all there. All you got to do is stay in the chat, and then it'll redirect you. And then after that, I'm going live with Green Bean for a 10 o'clock mock. I'm excited to do that. Tigo, thank you so much for filling in for Dom C. Anything you got going on that you want to talk about?
Not really. It's just regular content over on Talking Jets with Tigo. Come here Wednesday, because me and Green Bean are going to have a really fun time on Armchair GM. Probably going to be not rehashing, but breaking down, not from a draft perspective, but more from a general manager's perspective, this Haason Reddick deal, and hopefully something will happen between now and then for us to talk about that.
I love it. Boys and girls, this is Talking Jets. Done talking Jets. See ya.